Hi everyone and welcome to the 130th Learn with Lorna, where we're looking at music, dance and drama in the Highland Archive Service collections. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres across the north of Scotland, in Wick, in Inverness, in Portree and in Fort William, looking after historic documents. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. This week is the first of the pre-recorded sessions as I'm on holiday over Christmas and New Year. So this week pre-recorded and next week, and then we'll be back on the 12th of January live. Last week, I looked at the story of one particular actress, Mabel Love, an extraordinary story of highs and lows and heartbreak and triumph and all sorts of things. This week, I'm going from particular one actress to the general and looking at dance, drama and music across our collection, something that we associate so much with this time of year. So I'm going to break it into those 3 sections. And I'm going to start with dance. What do our collections have that tells us about the story of dance and dancing in the Highlands? Well, obviously it's undoubtedly a fact that we have danced for centuries. It's such a natural human thing to do, to have that physical contact, to move, to dance to music and so on. But where do we find it in our collections? The Margaret McDougall collection, which I've spoken about before, Learn with Lorna 41, contains a wealth of research notes into numerous subjects, many of which she compiled using the archive collections. And one such subject is the Inverness Dancing School. Margaret notes that there was a dancing school in Inverness from at least the early 1700s. Because there was such a huge fashion for dance at the time, there were dances and balls and assemblies and so on taking place. She mentions that Peter Gould is recorded as a dancing master in the town council minutes in the early 1700s. And the reason he's mentioned is because he's done something wrong. So quite often that's what happens, that we don't see general references, but we'll see when an issue arises. And Peter Gould is recorded because it's noted that he deserted the school to go and fight with the Jacobites at Sheriffmuir, and the town council are insisting that he should take the oath of loyalty to the king, which he had so far refused to do. They removed him from his job in the interim. And it's interesting that the dancing masters that we see in the records quite often seem to be of an interesting temperament. In 1756, when the borough again needs a dancing teacher, Baillie Rose advertised for one to come from Edinburgh, and he put in that specific reference to the fact that they wanted the dancing master to be sober and of virtuous character, a virtuous nature. And the dancing master of 1762-63 seems not to have been. William Alexander lasted for 3 months. He lasted from December 1762 to February 63, at which point he was not only dismissed, but forbidden to teach within Inverness Borough again, having been called before the Kirk Session for adultery. And it was decided there that there was danger of him having youths of both sexes under his care. Another teacher, John Kinnaird from Murrayshire, was also dismissed after reputable citizens complained about his conduct. This time, though, he lasted for 18 years and not the 3 months that William Alexander did. The dancing school in Inverness was moved from different locations, but was for many years in Mealmarket Close, just off the High Street, next to where the music school was at the time as well. If we move on a few years from those people I've mentioned so far, we come to John Dean, dancing teacher in the early 1800s. And in our county collections, we hold receipts for John Dean's payment. And again, it's that lovely thing of finding something in one collection and then finding more information in another one. So we hold receipts for the payment of John Dean, the borough dancing teacher, £10 for a half year, which was paid by the town council, because the school at that point was under the patronage of the town council and no one else could teach dancing within the borough boundaries. Later in the 1800s, that changed, and other dancing schools came into being, including other teachers who came to teach, including Joseph Lowe, who taught out of the old technical school and gave classes to both children and adults. And dancing, of course, was often taught in schools across the Highlands and also in other settings. And we find in various collections references to this. In our Northern Meeting collection, for instance, you may remember I spoke about the Northern Meeting a few weeks ago, there are numerous references to dances, to balls across the centuries, as well as evidence of visiting teachers coming to teach dancing, such as this example. Mademoiselle Lowenstein of Edinburgh presents her compliments to Mr. Henderson and begs to say that she intends visiting Inverness about the beginning of January to open classes for dancing and calisthenics, and would feel greatly obliged if Mr. Henderson could kindly allow for the use of the Northern Meeting Hall to teach in. Mr. Fraser, Commercial Bank House, was to have spoken to Mr. Henderson about it for Mademoiselle L, and will kindly tell her what the charge for the hall would be for that season of the year for 6 weeks. So we start to see not only that kind of borough system of teaching, but people coming from out with to teach in the borough. And of course, dances can be found in numerous collections, everything from school logbooks to business records, things like the A.I. Welders having annual Christmas dances, and school and police records where people are in trouble for attending dances and then becoming drunk and disorderly. Not to mention letters. It's just such a common pastime for us to congregate and to dance, especially at times of celebration. If you just think right now, I don't know where you're watching in the world, but right now across the Highlands and Islands, all our schools, or in the last week or so, all our schools will be having their Christmas ceilidhs and dances and so on for the end of the year. So we do come together to dance at times of celebration. Here's a touching extract from Lochaber Archive Centre, our Glenouick School logbook from 1918. The children celebrated the end of the war with a dance this afternoon. Little can be done these days in the way of feasting, but they're always happy enough with a dance. Unhappily, there are some exceptions, as 8 former pupils of this school have made the supreme sacrifice, and they still have relatives attending the school. Of course, they remember their own loss. So again, dancing because it's a moment of celebration that the war is over, but that tinge of loss and sadness that accompanies it. So much for dancing being represented in our collections. Well, dances aren't very much without music, but what do our collections tell us about music? Again, it permeates everything, because again, it's something so much associated with just being human, but also particularly with this part of the world, we're so much associated with music. And I thought I would start with a really fascinating document from the Fraser Tytler collection. It's possibly written by Lord Wodehouse Lee, and it's entitled On the Modern Taste in Music, written as a letter to a friend in the country. That's how it's titled. It's possibly by Lord Wodehouse Lee, Alexander Fraser Tytler, but I suspect it could be by another member of the family, William Tytler, who was around in the 1700s, was particularly interested in music, and I'm leaning towards it being William that's written it. Now, that is a different William to the William Fraser Tytler I've spoken about before. Trying to gauge the document, I mean, the handwriting is certainly 1700s. I'm looking at it on my other screen as I'm saying that. The document is certainly 1700s handwriting, and it refers to a piece that was written in 1735, being similar to the old music of Handel. But that piece he's talking about was set various times over the next sort of 70 years or so. So that doesn't particularly narrow it down. He also referred to an article written by the critic Daniel Webb, which was written in 1760. So we're talking somewhere thereabouts that this document and letter to a friend in the country was written. It's 13 pages long and it is completely fascinating. Now, I haven't transcribed it, so I'm reading it from the original 1700s handwriting, so if I make a mistake, forgive me, but it's actually lovely and clear, so I shouldn't. It opens with these words. He's writing this to his friend. I was present the other night at a concert of vocal and instrumental music. As I think it my duty to make my absent friend a sharer as much as I can in all my pleasures, I shall give you my sentiments on that entertainment. You and I are old musical acquaintances, and although neither of us professes that science, so we're not experts in it, we are perhaps not the less qualified to give a rational opinion upon a musical composition. So just because we're not professors, we're still entitled to have an opinion on it. As I had been for several years a stranger in the capital, it did not surprise me to find some considerable alteration, or improvements, as they are called in the modern manner. It is no wonder that the provincial cut of your and my coat, it is no wonder that the provincial cut of your coat and mine should seem antiquated and ridiculous. But I must tell you, my friend, that our taste and our judgment have likewise become ridiculous. The orchestra was very full. The band was conducted by a celebrated performer whose fame we have heard of in our corner of the kingdom, and from whom I consequently expected very high satisfaction. The concert opened with a new overture, the first move of which was an allegro. And he goes on to describe this concert, and I would heartily recommend, if you're interested in this, that you come in and have a nosy at this full letter. But he goes on to say that he's utterly unimpressed by the concert. He says he recognises the skill of the performers, particularly he talks about the female vocalist and says certainly, she has skill, there's no doubt she does very impressive things with her vocal range, but he says that's all I can do is to acknowledge the technical skill, because I detest the cacophony of noise and notes that came at me. His opinions on modern music are strident and perhaps not unfamiliar. He says that composers and performers both are too focused on the commercial. They are too busy pushing out their compositions into the marketplace and trying to sell their works, too busy claiming genius when they have none. But even more scathing is his opinion of the audience, who have, he says, basically implies that they have a severe case of the emperor's new clothes syndrome. He says they're basically following like sheep and enjoying whatever they think they're meant to enjoy without the skill or the discernment to judge properly what it is they're listening to. He concurs with a theory that was around at the time, that all music designed for public performance should come before an assessment panel to be passed before being released into the public arena. Hugely controversial, like everything like that. Who is to say? Who's to be the judge? Who's to set the standard when we all have different opinions, particularly on something so subjective as music? The writer of this letter also gives some interesting views on music's ability to stir feelings. He also says that music's ability to stir feelings is far inferior to the ability that painting has in that regard. But he says this: permit me to remark what I think is an error in judgment in most musical composers, ancient as well as modern, but particularly in the latter. It is that they imagine music and art capable of exciting a variety of passions, whereas in reality it can but simply affect a few of them. A composer shall take it into his head that he shall make a piece of music expressive of rage, but let any man hear this piece performed with all the fury of which it is capable, and yet it will never put him in a passion. His ears may be stunned with the noise, and his senses amazed, but I'm mistaken if he will feel even one spark of anger or fury. So he's not denying at all that music can generate emotion, but he says there are some emotions that music is not capable. You cannot listen to a piece of music and feel furious at the end of it. It's interesting. He goes on to say, it is vain to aim at expressing either hope or fear by musical sounds. They are mute passions and have no tone annexed to their expression. For the same reason, music is incapable of expressing accurately either love or hatred. A soft and plaintive air is best suited to a love song, because generally the character of the lover is soft and whining. But unless no man ever whined without being in love, the soft and plaintive tone cannot be an accurate expression of love. The passions in which music display in which music displays her power are those of joy and grief. Both of these have strong expression by tone, and they are so characteristically marked by sounds that there is no room for ambiguity. When I speak of a strong expression, I mean no more than comparatively with other musical expressions, for even at its most, it is demonstrative that the musical expression, both of joy and grief, is defective. No man ever felt the frantic emotion of impetuous joy, or the delightful rapture of that which is more tranquil, upon hearing a sprightly piece of incidental music. And I know nor whether the most plaintive melodies, without the aid of pathetic words, could excite tears. So he's saying that the only emotions that music can conjure up at all accurately are grief and joy, because they are so linked to a particular emotive sound. However, he says even those it can't really convey accurately. He also says noise, indeed, seems to be a principal aim of the modern composer, as may be easily imagined, where the design is rather to amaze and surprise than to please. For this it may perhaps be said that they have the example of the best of the old masters. Handel himself introduced drums and wooden cannon into some of his choruses, but let it be remembered that Handel in no instance deviated from propriety. When he wanted to express the horror and thunder of war, the thunder of his chorus could not be too tremendous. When he wished to express the grateful acclamation of thousands and the peal of thanksgiving and praise to the Almighty, the eternity of the theme called forth the highest powers of sound and the utmost energy of voices and instruments. But how different was his style when the subject required a softness and tenderness of expression. There he showed how much he possessed that real feeling of the sentiment which is essential to the character of a composer. It's not enough to possess the most profound knowledge of music, to be acquainted with all the powers of harmony and the mechanisms of counterpoint, unless the composer is at once a man of exquisite sense and exquisite feeling. His work, however they might amuse the trifling soul of a modern dilettante, will soon sink to that eternal oblivion where they justly merit. Really, really interesting. I was utterly fascinated when I found this document. It's such a personal take on music, and really interesting, that constant pattern of every generation thinking that the next generation's music is just noise and has absolutely no value compared to the proper music of their generation. Really interesting. Coming more up to date with looking at music, we have references across our collections. Again, as I said, it's something so fundamental to being human, to sing and to take part in music and want to make noise. So we have references within our family collections. So for instance, in our Baillie of Dunayne collection, there are various family members in the 1800s writing about their music lessons. And music lessons, of course, occur in our school records, and like the dancing school, appear in our borough records in Inverness and in the Margaret MacDougall collection, where she records there being a music school in Inverness from at least 1662 onwards, with one early teacher being accused of forced marriage against one of his pupils. A later borough music teacher lost his job for assaulting one of the bailies. So these music and dancing teachers in the borough just seems to cause all kinds of drama. The importance of music teaching can also be seen in our Caithness collections, as this letter from George Mitchell to the Reverend Douglas Briggs shows. Dear Reverend Sir, as an originator of a method of violin playing in Caithness back in 1935, I was interested to notice your name mentioned in a short editorial in the Press and Journal of December 1961. No report was given in my issue, so I came to the conclusion that you were trying to do something by way of encouraging the study of the violin once again. This, to my knowledge, is the third attempt your committee has made to establish a permanent scheme in the county schools for the teaching of violin. I sincerely hope you will be successful this time. And he goes on in this letter written to Reverend Briggs to note that rather than teaching violin only at secondary level, it would be best to start it in primary 4 with basic training before starting violin playing in primary 5, so that by the time the pupils reached first year of secondary, they will be ready to devote one period to violin playing and a second period to normal musical instruction every week. He also records in this letter that he suggests that a practice that violins should be made by the woodworking class, an experiment that has proven successful in his school at Peterhead with the keyboard class. Therefore, the cost of the violins would be kept low, and his former students in Wick, he says, used to practice violins for only a year while they saved up so they would have a new violin that they could use if they went on to a second year. And then the practice violins could go on to the incoming first-year pupils. In this letter, he encloses a beautiful photograph that you might have seen possibly in our education exhibition that shows the Wick Academy's second-year violin class with their own new violins in 1937. I love that idea. I love the, make it a whole effort. Just get the woodwork class to make the violins, and then they can practice them and save up for their new violins. So far I've looked at music in a kind of official setting, lessons and teachers and schools. And of course we have huge numbers of competition records across our collections that are references to music competitions such as the Northern Meeting piping competition, and there are reports in the Clarion and Skye and Loch Alsh of piping competitions and so on. But of course music is often first and foremost a community and a communal thing. So where do we see that in the collections? Where do we see music for pleasure, for company, for group performance? We have several relevant collections, particularly at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, where we hold archive collections of Inverness Organist Society. The 1988 Constitution for the Inverness Organist Society says that it was formed with the aim of advancing the education of the public in the study of the art of music, with special reference to liturgical and organ music. To that end, they hosted lectures and demonstrations and performances and gave advice to people who were interested in the subject. We hold the records of Inverness Choral Society, which traces its roots back to the 19th century and is still going strong today, through amalgamations such as the 1976 amalgamation with Beloch Choral, at which point it became Inverness and District Choral Society, and changes to its structure. So for instance, in 1968-69, Inverness Choral came out and separated from the County Education Authority to become a standalone organisation. So again, it's that link between the local authority and the creative arts that I mentioned with dancing. The Inverness and District Choral Society collection includes minutes, correspondence, membership lists, programmes, photos, press cuttings, and other material as well, including, from my point of view, a very fascinating and useful booklet produced in 2020 to mark the official centenary. So although the roots go back before that, the official centenary was 2020. And that includes the Society's story, references to awards won, and also memorable moments, such as some of the members singing with Russell Watson, singing at the opening of the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, and singing in the Royal Albert Hall. So a very active and long-standing musical society within the Highlands and Islands, and as I say, still very much going strong today. We hold the minutes of Nairn Music Club from 1964 to 1971, which reveals the work done by that organisation to bring different types of music performance to Nairn and the surrounding area. The volume opens with these words: "The 17th Annual General Meeting of Nairn Musical Association was held at the Royal Hotel on Tuesday the 13th of April 1964, when there was a very encouraging attendance of 55. It goes on to say who was in the chair and who welcomed them, thanking the people who have attended for their support throughout the season. The minutes of the previous AGM were read, and on the motion of Miss Murray, seconded by Miss Bryce, the previous meetings of the previous AGM were approved. The President outlined the difficulties and expense involved in bringing Opera for All to St Ninian's Hall, and said that the committee felt that we would have to give up the idea of having such a performance until Nairn had acquired a hall with a suitable stage." And so there's a reference there to the fact that they've got these things lined up. They've got ideas that they want to do, but they don't quite have a venue lined up. That first entry in that minute book also expresses a hope that the society will continue to play a part in the cultural life of the community until this minute book runs out, which I thought was quite a lovely way to open a minute book. These minutes of the Nairn Music Club record, they record them changing its name, first of all, because it wasn't a club to start with. I think it was an association. Also record the club giving prizes to Nairn Academy and Millbank Primary for the pupil showing special distinction in music. They record their work in circulating adverts for events to all those interested in music in the district. The minutes record references to holding talks and hosting performances. So just some examples. Albion Opera performing Gilbert and Sullivan. Antonia y Marino, Spanish dancers. The Berlin String Quartet, which had charged a fee of £150, and they charged a 30p entrance fee to attend. Opera for All, that were mentioned in that last entry, did come and perform, and they charged, it said it was their most ambitious undertaking to date. They charged £370, and the society, or the music club, charged a 75p entrance fee. The Perth Theatre Company came, the Saltire Vocal Quartet came. So it's clearly a hugely important organisation in bringing music, dance and drama to Nairnshire. The volume ends in 1971, and I'm so sad to say it ends before the book was completed, with the dissolution of Nairn Music Club. This is what they said at the meeting in April 1971. A lengthy and well thought out discussion followed as to the club's future, and it was finally decided that it was impossible to continue in being, since Eden Court was now providing almost all the needs musically of the surrounding population. So it's that mixed good and sad thing. Eden Court opening was a huge boon to the area, and they felt that that Eden Court was now providing what they had been providing, so perhaps they ought to dissolve. So they proposed dissolution, which was seconded, and it said it should be put on record that this course of action, seen as most necessary, was nonetheless only accomplished with great reluctance and with some sadness. A further discussion took place as to the best method of dispersing of the club's assets, the balance of the bank, and so on. So they decide that they're going to write a cheque and give it to stumble over all of that. They decided to give the piano to the community centre to donate it for anyone who might require it. At the following meeting in May, they conclude matters, and they say the motion that the Nairn Music Club be disbanded was proposed and seconded and carried unanimously. A discussion followed as to the disposal of the club's assets, and 5 societies were chosen to receive an equal sum of £30 each. And they were Nairn Amateur Light Operatic Society, Nairn Drama Club, Nairn Arts Society, Nairn Literary Institute, Nairn Fisherton Museum. And the meeting closed with thanks to the few attending, and all affairs of the Nairn Music Club were finally finished. It's always sad reading a last entry where something is dissolved. But I thought that was extraordinary. The fact that when they dissolved in 1971, there was an amateur light opera company, a drama club, an arts society, a literary institute, and the museum in Nairn. And of course, some of those are still in operation. And as I say, the opening of Eden Court had a huge impact across the Highlands and Islands on dance, music and drama. And we hold records relating to Eden Court and to the fact that the work that they have done in bringing performers up and growing performers in the Highlands as well. And we do hold reference papers relating to Eden Court, but there are also references to drama elsewhere, and that's what I wanted to touch on. We hold a surprising number of scripts, including Hamish Macbeth's scripts in Skye and Loch Elsh, and those used by various amateur dramatic societies and clubs such as Ardasir Amateur Dramatics. There's also a particularly nice 1953-1954 edition of Samuel French's Guide to Selecting Plays, which is a hefty wee book full of suggestions for Amdram groups. I love it. I mean, there's something exciting about scripts and librettos and things anyway, but I loved this when I opened it. It's exactly how I like to organise my brain. It's split into sections with everything you could need if you were in an amateur dramatic group looking for a play. Now, obviously, Samuel French still exists supplying plays, so if someone is watching who's in an amateur dramatics group, you can let me know if they still produce their guide to selecting plays. At the beginning, it's split into sections of certain numbers, so if you were looking for plays for groups of 7 players, they're all listed. If you're looking for plays split into groups of 3 men and 4 women, or 10 men and 4 women, whatever it might be, there's a breakdown of plays that might suit you. There's also a breakdown of plays by theme, so there are biblical plays split into 1 act and full length, children's plays split into age of children, historic plays into light and serious. It's just extraordinary, and each one has a synopsis, and then you can order the full script. It's brilliant. Speaking of scripts and playwrights, in Lochaber Archive Centre we have a great letter written by a W.G. Clarke to Archibald Clarke on the possibility that Shakespeare could have visited Fort William and the Highlands and been inspired to write Macbeth. Extraordinary. Apparently there was a rumour that he had visited Fort William, so there you go, who knows. But my favourite drama collection, and the one I'm going to finish with, is 1 volume of minutes, dating from 1879 onwards, of the Amateur Dramatic Society of Inverness. This volume opens with the usual formula of minute books, so it reveals the fact that the Society has a weekly meeting, that they meet in the rehearsal rooms on Castle Street, and that Mr. Morello is in the chair. We discover in those early pages that any person becoming a member had to pay an entrance fee of 5 shillings, and then not less than 3d a week until his share was paid. Each share was £1, and they were limited to 20 shares. Really interesting. It's unlike anything else. It goes on to describe the various rules for the shareholders, including the fact that each shareholder is entitled to 5 1-shilling tickets for each series of entertainments. Members to this club had to be proposed and seconded. One thing I found really interesting, just in the first couple of pages of the volume, was that in 1879, Mr. Munro was censured for smoking during the meeting, which I thought was really surprising. The minutes record performances of Gilderoy, of Secret, of Cram and Brig, of Bombast and others. And they have cast lists, which is fab. And those lists of cast names can be found in the volume, but also at the back of the volume, along with the names of the people attending the meetings. So a really interesting resource that you could maybe find something you would not expect at all to find somebody's name in. On flicking through the book, not only was I surprised to see someone being censured for smoking during the meeting, but I was tickled to find in 1884 this reference. Any member refusing to play a character in any panto, farce, sketch, biographical or dramatic, comedy, in dramatis personae, shall be subject to the enforcement of the bylaws. So basically, if you refuse to play a part, then the weight of the bylaws of the society are coming down on you. And someone then wrote back in the minutes, well, some members might not be very good at certain things, and they shouldn't be bullied into something or infringed upon if they're not very good at that particular thing. And the reply came back, if you can't play a character, you should retire from the society, do the right thing. It's and then it says there were no more grumbles after that. It's a fab volume, and it really merits more time than I was able to give it for this, so I may well come back to it. So even in that whistle-stop tour through dance, drama and music, you can see that it's peppered across our collections. It touches every area of our life, as it continues to do. And we see that it's at the heart of our communities, at times of war and times of peace, in education, in the home, in theatres, in churches. Music and dance and drama pervades everything. And I wanted to finish by sharing an extract from a World War II project that we hold in our Skye and Loch Archive Centre. It's entitled Keeping Spirits Up. One good thing that happened in wartime was that communities built on their strengths. In crofting townships and fishing villages, people were used to being independent, to working together, and to sharing life's joys and hardships. It was natural for them to seek each other's company and to build on their existing network of support in wartime. Informal gatherings at the Cayley House to pass on news, tell stories, or share a song remained at the heart of many townships. Inevitably, conversation would turn to the war and concern for those who had left. Homes where there was a radio attracted gatherings. The church community and personal faith provided comfort for many. Special services of prayer and thanksgiving were held by all denominations through the war. Particular effort was made to give children something to enjoy, be it a Christmas party, an excursion for the brownies, or a visit from the Ministry of Information film van. Dramas were performed in village halls. Children contributed to concerts and fundraising schemes to help the war effort. Forces from the bases throughout the area invited local people in for whist drives, dances, football matches, or film shows. The naval base at Kyle started its own band, which played for dances ashore and on board ship. Thus it was in small halls that some of Scotland's remotest Gaelic-speaking areas that the latest British and American films were seen, and the latest modern music was heard. A great opportunity for combining work with laughter, food and song was the traditional walking of the cloth, where the hand-spun and home-woven tweed was shrunk. The last walking to take place in Brechish was arranged in December 1939 as a deliberate antidote to the outbreak of war. Whether brass bands or bagpipes, whether the entertainment was spontaneous or organised, the people of Skye, Raasay and the West Coast mainland made every effort to keep their spirits up. I hope you've enjoyed that quick tour through some of our music, dance and drama collections. I hope you can join me next week for another pre-recorded episode where we'll be looking at the Ian Sutherland collection held in Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. But in the meantime, I'd like to wish you all a Happy New Year, and a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. Thank you.